Hello, this is Ian Beckles, and you're listening to Cigar City Radio.
Cigar City Radio is sponsored by No Clubs and StateMedia.com. Find out about upcoming concerts in Tampa Bay by visiting StateMedia.com and tagging No Clubs on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Use the hashtag #WeAreConcerts.
Next up for No Clubs, Friday, November 16th, The Main Squeeze is at the Orpheum. And then Saturday, November 17th, another two-show night, Atreyu with Memphis Mayfire is going to be at the Ritz Ybor. And then down the street at the Orpheum, you can catch Magic City Hippies and Bay Ledges. Wednesday, November 21st, a three-show night with Red Sun Rising at the Orpheum, Mayday Parade at the Ritz Ybor, and across the bay at Janus Live, VNV Nation will be there. So Wednesday, November 21st, big night, 3 shows. Should be a lot of fun. Which one are you going to go to? Tuesday, November 27th, Minus the Bear will be at the Ritz Ybor. Also, just announced No Name, January 18th. Lots of cool shows announced for next year. Go on to statemedia.com and check all those out. We'll be telling you all about them in future eps. Welcome to Cigar City Radio, episode number 87. The song you just heard was Wrong Side of the Tracks by the legendary Tampa band Stranger off the album No Rules, which until recently was not available on the internet. You couldn't get it on Spotify. You couldn't get it on Apple Music. You couldn't get it anywhere. But we linked up with Greg Billings from Stranger and made sure that was no longer the case. So now you can listen to Stranger, all their albums, No Rules, Angry Dogs, No More Dirty Deals, and everything else from the Stranger band on Spotify, on Apple Music, the original recordings, thanks to us and thanks to Greg Billings.
You're welcome.
Yes. So go and listen to him now. That was Wrong Side of the Tracks. Perfect segue into another great Tampa legend who we're going to talk to on this episode. I'm your host, Randy Ojeda, and making the magic happen, a man who always gives 101, Mr. Jason Solanas.
Hey, Randy, speaking of giving 101, what do you think about a man wrapping his around a golf ball and using the pressure of the to launch it?
No, I'm going to stop you right there. The
thought's in your head now, though.
Yeah, unfortunately it is.
Imagine that on a golf course.
Oh, my God. Our guest on this episode is author Scott M. Ditchy, who wrote a fantastically titled book called Cigar City Mafia, a complete history of the Tampa underworld. He also wrote The Silent Dawn, the criminal underworld of Santo Traficante Jr. He wrote several other books, including his newest one, Garden State Gangland, The Rise of the Mob in New Jersey. So as you can tell, Scott is a historian and an expert on the mafia and organized crime. He also hosts Cigar City Magazine's Tampa Mafia Tour, which takes place in Ybor City. It's an 1.5 to 2 hour walking tour. The 2018 dates are totally booked up, but they're going to be booking 2019 tour dates soon. You can go to cigarcitymagazine.com to book one of those tours. They meet outside of King Corona Cigar Shop on 7th Avenue. It's a really awesome tour. And there's not cigar smoke involved. So if you're not into the cigar smoke part of it,
You'll survive.
you'll survive. It's mostly about the mob. And Scott also is involved in the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. So if you can't make it out to Tampa, or if you're closer to Las Vegas and you want to know more about the mob, check out the Mob Museum. I've never been, but it sounds really awesome. Scott talks about it in this interview. They're also starting to do tours to Cuba, which sounds like an amazing opportunity. So I'm rambling on. I'm going to let Scott do the talking in this episode. He tells us all about the cool stuff that he's involved in, and we learned a lot from him. This was a really special episode for us because, I mean, hey, we're Cigar City Management. We're called Cigar City Radio. The first time I ever heard the phrase Cigar City was this book sitting on my dad's shelf, Cigar City Mafia. So thank you, Scott, for coming on the show and talking to us. Hopefully we'll have you on again because we just scratched the surface of his music knowledge. I didn't realize that Scott was such a metalhead until the end of the episode, where he finally told us that his favorite band from Tampa is, oh shit, I'm not going to spoil it for you. Listen to it. So here it is, episode number 87. Start was I wanted to actually ask you about the Cigar City Mafia name, and where that came from.
When I was writing the book, when I started doing research for it and started writing it, it's like sometime in the late 90s, right around the turn of the 2000s. I threw out some names of a book, and I was going to go with the working title was Cigar City Gangsters. And that was the working title all the way up through it being purchased by the publisher. And then they came back with, this is a little punchier. Let's do Cigar City Mafia. So when that came out in 04, January of 2004, it's been it's been 14 years already.
Yeah.
That was the title. So Cigar City Mafia stuck. Then after that, the Tampa Bay Roller Derby League, the Cigar City Mafia team started, which I went to a lot of their games early on. That was very cool. And they reached out to me and said, yeah, we were big fans of the book. So that name came. And then, Cigar City itself, the moniker's been around forever. So as you guys have this, Cigar City Brewing, obviously. It's a Cigar City Magazine, which Lisa Figueiredo started. It's a really cool nickname for the city, much better than so many other, nicknames of other cities around the country. So I think it's great that it's being embraced and grabbed onto for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And that's one of the things, like when we, named our show Cigar City Radio, like we wanted to make sure that we're putting Tampa and this area, at the forefront of everything we do.
Absolutely. And I think the name, like I said, I don't know when the name started, to be honest with you. I saw references to, going back a long time, but it's a great nickname. And certainly it, promotes the brand of Tampa and from a variety of different perspectives. So.
Definitely. Yeah. And people ask us sometimes, they're like, how do you get away with that? Like, doesn't Cigar City Brewing own the name? And I was like, no, I mean, it's like, it's like Big Apple or Windy City or something where it's like,
you just can't make a beer called
right.
Cigar City. You'll probably be fine.
No, we're not. If we wanted to make a beer, they would be the first people we'd call to make that.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. But there's tons of my cousin has a Cigar City clothing company, and there's Cigar City, barbershop, and Cigar City
marketing,
Cigar City salsa, which is really good.
Yeah.
So, but I honestly think that this book kind of popularized the name in a way. I don't know if you want to take that much credit for it, but
sure.
For me,
why not?
For me, it was my first real, because I don't want to make you feel old or anything, but when the book came out, I was in high school. So, so that was my kind of introduction into Cigar City, and obviously like just the whole Cigar City underworld, which I didn't know was even a thing until the book.
Yeah, a lot of people don't, especially people that didn't grow up here or grew up here, not in the 30s, 40s, 50s, grew up here much later. And with all the transplants that are coming here, there are a lot of people that aren't aware of that history.
Yeah,
and it's an important part of the history. There's some people around, some old timers that still kind of chafe at that and chafe at the book. And when I'm doing my Ybor tours, but it's an integral part of the history of Tampa. the political history of Tampa, the economic history of Tampa, a lot of that ties together with it. So if you don't understand that aspect, and I understand it and the fact that a lot of people don't want that promoted, but like any city you go, there's crime tours, there's ghost tours. I mean, we have this gigantic celebration celebrating a fictional pillaging pirate. So
it's true.
Come on. I mean, that doesn't really hold a lot of water with me. And it's not like you're promoting it from a glamour aspect. You're promoting it because it's really interesting part of the city that a lot of people really like reading and going on tours, those kind of things. And, true crime is always very popular no matter what. So
actually on the podcast side, true crime podcasts are the most popular genre of podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
So
people love that.
Yeah. So why Tampa? Why of all cities to have this kind of history? There's only a few like kind of mafia cities, and I guess Tampa's not like a Philadelphia or New York, but
Yeah, so at the height, there was at least 26 to 30 cities around the country where there were functioning mafia families. Certainly by the time the mafia became kind of what we know as the modern crime families, there was about 26 to 28. Depending on who you ask, the mafia families around the country. Most of them were like Tampa. They were smaller. So there were only really kind of the New York, Chicago, Detroit, the bigger ones. Mm-hmm. Tampa developed kind of as a twist of fate with the cigar industry coming here. You had the immigration here, Cuban, Spanish, German. You also had some Sicilian immigration here into Tampa, Ybor City specifically. And in that group, there were people affiliated with organized crime. And you start seeing this in the 19-teens with some black hand extortion activities here in Ybor. And we got our first inkling, really, of the nationwide scope where Tampa sat in 1928 in Cleveland. There was a meeting of bootleggers from around the country, and two Tampa guys were there, Tampa grocer Ignacio Italiano and a Tampa restaurant owner, Joe Vaglica, and they were arrested and their mugshots were taken, and they all said they were just going up there to buy olive oil.
Right, of course.
Other people at that meeting was Joe Profaci, who founded one of the New York Five families in New York. So, going back all the way back to the 1920s, you see the Tampa crime figures kind of tied in with that national scale. So it was really that immigrant community and that the cigar industry here that made Ybor what it is, and that criminal element kind of piggybacked on that.
So was Ignacio Italiano? He was the first like kind of real Tampa mob boss.
Yeah, based on the information I have, and it's very sparse back then. He was probably the first, what you call the first major mafia boss of the Sicilian mafia, but the first major crime boss in Tampa by far was Charlie Wall. Okay, he really was the first, what you would call like the underworld kingpin. So he controlled far more than the Sicilians did at that point. He had the judiciary in his pocket. He was controlling elections. He had prostitution, narcotics trafficking, bootlegging, gambling. He pretty much had it all for a good 25 years before he was deposed.
Yeah, that seems like a long time in kind of the span of like running a crime syndicate or a crime organization. Like 25 years seems like a longer shelf life than most of these guys had.
Yeah, well, let's scale back from, let's say, about 2015 to 25. But I just did some quick math in my head.
Yeah, no, sure.
But no, it is regardless. And I think there was a few things going on at that point. One, he was very connected politically. Mm-hmm. Number two is that he was kind of well liked. From contemporary accounts, he was one, especially during the early years of the Depression, would go around giving kids gold coins and setting up soup kitchens and kind of cultivating that Robin Hood gangster figure. He controlled a lot of what people considered the harmless vices, the gambling, the prostitution, although he was center in a major narcotics ring that operated out of Ybor City. He himself was a morphine addict. But I think his political connections and his sway over the upper world really kind of kept him I don't want to say kept him at bay, but certainly kept him from the scrutiny that he probably would have gotten, say, had he come to power like in the 70s or 80s when there was far more law enforcement attention on that.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It was probably much easier to like pay off law enforcement or somebody back then than it became, and so, but he got like his throat cut or something, right? Wasn't it like?
Yeah,
something crazy like that, like something very Mafia movie-esque.
Yeah, so in 1955, long after he had kind of faded from the scene, he was still around in Tampa, and one night he was at a mob bar, the Dream Bar on Nebraska, and he was driven home by a guy named Nick Scaglione, who was a Mafia figure. And his wife was on vacation. She came home a couple days later, and he was in the back room of their house with his throat cut, and his head was bashed in with a blackjack.
Oh,
and he definitely knew his killers because it was all the way in the back room of his house, so he let him in. And before he passed away, I had the opportunity to talk to Ellis Clifton, who was a cop who was one of the first on the scene, and he investigated the murder, which is still a cold case. It's open. But he identified 3 suspected Mafia figures that he was pretty much convinced were the ones that did the killing at the behest of Santo Trafficante Jr., but never had enough evidence, and like I said, it's still considered an open cold case, if you will, in Tampa PD.
Yeah, and that actually kind of brings me to something I've always wondered is what writing a book like this. It's probably the most comprehensive recollection of the Tampa Mafia history. So what kind of sources did you have to find and dig up to get this history? Because like you said, even early on there wasn't a lot available. So was it mostly talking to law enforcement or people that were working at the time, or how did you put this together?
Yeah, it was talking a lot of law enforcement. It was hard to get other people to talk, and I'll get to that point at the end, how that's changed over the years.
Yeah, that's what I could imagine too. Like, I mean, I feel like a lot of people for saying some of this stuff could get, their throats cut,
Yeah, and a lot of it too is Tampa being a very small community. A lot of these people knew each other and grew up together with each other, and they're a little hesitant to talk about that. And I understand that for sure. So when I was approaching the first book, you gotta realize I started in like 94.
Wow.
So 94, 95. And it was really kind of a part-time thing. It was just I'm kind of interested in this. Let me see where this goes. So it was going to the library, digging through old newspaper clippings, going to back when the Tampa Tribune building was there on the river, going in their original archives and looking through reporters' notes and newspapers. Writing handwritten letters to the FBI for FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests, getting redacted files back. So it was kind of a laborious process, a lot of looking to the National Archives I went to and the local library, and I was still kind of limited by what I had. And law enforcement, I met some law enforcement people, retired as well, who were very, very giving of their time and materials as well. So let's say I ended research for that particular book right around 2002, and then started writing it. Nowadays, things have changed. Well, the one thing that changed dramatically is after Cigar City Mafia came out, a lot more people were open to talking with me. So I used a lot, like for the Silent Dawn, the second book, I used a lot more primary sources, people giving me information and stories. And over the years, a few things. I've cultivated lines of sources and communication, which is good, but so much more is available now online. It's so much easier to get stuff. It's so much easier to request stuff, to find stuff, vital records, FBI records. There's been a treasure trove of material that's been released over the years that's made its way into some online databases, unredacted. I mean, pretty much most Mafia surveillance files from the FBI from the 60s to early 70s are available online now. So it's made it a lot easier and a lot more efficient for someone like me that writes as a side job. So now I can, turn around and do that research, which took me like 5 or 6 years in a year.
Yeah.
So it's, sometimes it's fun digging through the old stuff, looking for it. Like I went down to the Dade County Archives and literally hand filing through file cabinets looking for stuff, which was cool. But there's something to be said about pressing a button and doing a search function and finding it right away.
Deleting the tedium.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Who were some of the more interesting primary sources, if you're allowed to say? I don't know.
There were a couple Florida Department of Law Enforcement agents that had spent a lot of time investigating organized crime. One that went undercover. They were very interesting to talk to. Retired FBI agents tend to be pretty good fountains of information. They won't say a word when they're on the job, but once they retire, I found some really good sources of that. And relatives of people I've written about have contacted me over the years, telling me stories. I've met a couple guys I've written about. They won't talk, but I've met them. And I've met other organized crime figures that either in a witness protection program, others from other parts of the country. And that's been helpful for other books. The Jersey book, I met some Jersey guys. I spent a lot of time last year with an individual named Myron Sugarman, who has his own book out, and he was a Jewish gangster in New Jersey. And, so using some of those sources, if you just use law enforcement, you get their perspective. You just use the wise guys, you get their perspective. So you got to kind of, as a writer, you're limited by the information you have to make it work. So I try as hard as I can to get as much as I can and try to make it accurate. There's a lot of stuff, especially when you're writing about the mafia over the years, that become like the myth of the mob.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like how close is it in your opinion to the movies? Is good. What's the most accurate mafia movie?
Based on people that I've talked to, what I've seen, and something like Goodfellas is pretty accurate.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, it's you're flying high one day, eating at these fancy restaurants. Next year, trying to get the cocaine out of that you just flushed down the toilet out because you need the cash. It's it kind of showed a little bit of the drudgery and the day-to-day working. One wise guy who I've known really well for a number of years really recommended this Lost movie. I would call it Lost movie, a lesser known early 70s movie with Robert Mitchum called The Friends of Eddie Coyle. It's really about a low-level guy in the Boston underworld. It's a fantastic movie. And he said that kind of captures some of that like scheming for a buck kind of feel that a lot of those guys have. Whereas The Godfather's the opposite end, the kind of the more glamorous, the poetic, operatic side of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes everything seem grand, even while people are getting gunned down. And
exactly,
stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd never heard of that movie, so I'm gonna have to
definitely check it out. It's it was made in I think it's like 72 or 73, and really that kind of gritty 70s feel to it.
That's awesome. What's your personal favorite mafia movie?
Goodfellas. Yeah, that was when I kind of got me when I saw that in the movies. That was when I kind of got me started on reading about the mob, which got me started about reading about the mob in Tampa, and then that kind of kick-started the obsession. And I just watched it recently again, and there's not a wasted second in that movie.
Yeah.
Even from an artistic perspective, from filmmaking wise, it's pretty close to flawless. And The Godfather epic, I'll call it, is a close second. That's the one where they take 1 and 2 and kind of mix them together and have the linear story. That's great.
Yeah,
if you have 7 hours,
7 hours to kill. Yeah. That's something my dad would do like every weekend if he could, is just watch The Godfather over and over again. So are you from Tampa originally? Is that
No, I'm from New Jersey.
Oh, there you go.
I came down here to Eckerd College. I got a degree in marine science. Moved back up north for a little bit, but I've been down here since '95 over in St. Pete.
So that's where the interest came from, was just already kind of.
Yeah, it was already there, and I got back down here, and I actually met a gentleman, David Critchley, on the internet. It has to be like early '95, like maybe they're early to mid '95, and there was a guy had like a text-only Mafia website, and I was corresponding with David over in the UK, and he said, "Hey, I have these congressional hearings from Tampa, the Kefauver Commission." He said, I see you're back in that area. Would you be interested in reading these?" I said, "Yeah." So he sent me these photocopies, and it was the stories of Charlie Wall and these war for control of gambling in Tampa, and it was dozens of gangland hits, and I was like, "Oh, this is really interesting." So that kind of really started the ball rolling on the Tampa focus.
That's really cool. And I think it's interesting you talked about how like small of a community Tampa is, and it kind of still is in a way. And I think it's funny to like go back and read the book and like see, names and people that we know, like somebody who's mentioned a few times in the book is an old family friend of ours, E.J. Salcinas, who was the attorney general at the time. I think it was like the Badami organization. Mm-hmm. And, you have that story in the book about how somebody came to his house and like offered him like $75,000 or something like that to drop the suit against somebody else that was connected to the organization. And, that like I've heard those stories kind of through him as well. So it's interesting to like, know somebody that's like been a central part in like, in this whole thing.
Oh yeah. And especially with the political figures, like, I get asked a lot about Dick Greco, but there's no evidence that he was ever tied to them, but they grew up together. So he knew these guys.
Yeah.
I know police officers who ended up going, arresting guys they grew up in the same neighborhood with, both here in Tampa and up, in New Jersey, New York City, or they grew up in these, whether it's a tight-knit neighborhood or a tight-knit city, one becomes the cop, one becomes the gangster kind of thing. So, that's one thing I try to look at with allegations against, political figures too. A lot of it's just, you're being a politician, you shake everybody's hand.
Yeah, of course.
But it's pretty fascinating stuff, especially from kind of the outside looking in. Although, I've been here now 25 years, almost. So I'd like to think that I have a little bit better understanding of the local scene.
Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah, after so long, right?
Yeah. And I've been doing tours in Ybor City. We do Mafia walking tours.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that next. Actually, so tell us a little bit about the walking tour.
Yeah,
like, where does it start?
I've been doing this for about 10 years now. We usually meet at King Corona. We go from September to May. In fact, our fall tours are sold out, but if you're interested, you go to Cigar City Magazine website on the events page. We post the dates up there. You can buy the tickets right online. Yeah, it's about an hour and a half to 2 hour walking tour. It's about a mile and change loop around Ybor, and we hit about anywhere from 10 to 12 spots, depending on accessibility on a couple of them. But basically talk about the history of organized crime in Tampa. And there's a lot of places here in Ybor City that were pivotal in the growth of organized crime operations, not only in Tampa, but we tie it back to Havana as well as some other places.
So without obviously giving away the whole tour, what are some key spots that, people can be on the lookout for if they're in Ybor? And
we talk about the Columbia restaurant being kind of a hangout for a lot of the wise guys. We go by two places off the beaten path that were sites of pretty major Mafia hits. We go up on 15th Street, what's left of the Yellow House, which is a kind of basically a shell of a building across the street from Hillsborough Community College. There's a few areas around the Los Novedades, the El Pasaje, Ybor Square, in that area that we talk about. So we kind of start in the older part and then get down, kind of past the Italian Club and talk about the Columbia. So it's pretty comprehensive. And depending on my crowd, if I have a lot of people that didn't grow up in Tampa, I'll throw some just general Tampa history so they kind of, can have a little bit of frame of reference of what we're discussing.
Yeah. That's interesting because it's pretty tied together. I guess like the whole kind of Ybor City history and how the Mafia kind of came to be. Because like you said, it was the Italian, Sicilian immigrants mixing with like the Cuban immigrants and all these people and all these different cultures kind of coming to an area and, looking to gain some kind of power and control.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely very unique.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I totally just had a brain. The brain fart. Jason, you got something? I know you've been looking like you were.
What? So you write and you do the tours in Ybor, but you have a degree in marine biology?
Yes. Yeah, that's my day job.
What would be your title for your day job? Just as a curiosity.
Well, I used to be a fishery. I used to say I would be a fish biologist, environmental scientist, but now I do a lot of management. So I'm environmental project manager would probably be a pretty accurate title.
Okay. So what does your day-to-day work process involve?
It's anywhere from being a guidance counselor to a firefighter. I'm either putting out fires or letting. So we do a lot. So I work. I manage a environmental group for an engineering consulting firm. We do a lot of work for municipalities throughout Florida and in Tampa Bay. A couple projects I've managed recently. We did a water resources plan for Lowry Park Zoo. We're doing some work now for the city of St. Pete on sea level rise. Done some water quality work in Tampa Bay for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. So we do a lot of stormwater, water quality work. That's my area of expertise, as well as some ecological work, and then we do work for the water management districts and stuff. So it's extremely varied. Every day is just something completely different.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah.
So your day from beginning to end, do you spend time after your work day researching and writing, or do you cut out parts of your week specifically for that?
Yeah, if right now I'm kind of on a sabbatical right now. For a couple of reasons. I've wrote about 3 books in a row, so I just needed some breathing space, and also work. Day job is getting real busy now, so I just needed about a year off right now. But when I'm working on a book, or say I sell a book tomorrow and I have to get it into the publisher by this time next year, well, I'll start in my head kind of planning how I'm going to do it. I generally write at night. I don't think I would have been a good writer in the era of typewriters. I'm very much a cut and paste kind of, let me write bit and pieces and kind of put it together. But I generally do my best writing at night. And I'll also, in terms of the research, I'll kind of do a research plan of how I'm going to get the information I need. Now, even though I'm on sabbatical, I'm always collecting stuff. So sometimes if I have an hour or something on the computer, I'll go do some research on some stuff that I think I might want to write about or explore in the future, and then pull that stuff in. And I also, I'm doing writings. I write blog posts for the Mob Museum in Las Vegas for their website. I just did one on a mob family in San Jose, California, another one people probably don't know anything about. So I'm still constantly keep my eye out of what's out there. So,
are you ever worried that somebody's gonna come in the middle of the night and
no? I write about mostly historical stuff.
Yeah.
And traditionally the American Mafia hasn't been that way towards journalists. I'm not writing about the Mexican cartels or anything like that. That's a level of involvement that I wouldn't get myself into. And it doesn't really interest me. I'm more of the historical stuff. That's the stuff that I think kind of really has a lot more appeal to me as a writer.
Yeah.
Besides, there's some really good authors doing the other stuff.
Have you ever considered doing like current history involved with the Mafia?
Some of my books bleed into the current, like the New Jersey one. I talk about some more current kind of stuff. And some of the families, the smaller ones like a Tampa, or if I were to do something on like San Jose or something, there's just no current stuff because it's kind of faded away. Yeah. But the Jersey Mob book I kind of brought up to date, just talking about just general overall trends in organized crime in Jersey. So some of it does bleed over into the newer stuff. But even with the newer stuff, I'm not like going out there and confronting guys on the street or doing that kind of that gotcha journalism with them. It's more of looking at, available information, law enforcement, or interviewing people and getting that kind of stuff.
No man on the street mafia style.
No.
No.
Yeah,
probably for the best. Hey, what do you think about killing that guy?
Yeah. Although I've taken some tours. It was funny. I was out in Vegas at the Mob Museum this past year. I did an event out there. And I'll throw a quick plug in because I'm on their advisory board. If you're in Vegas, in downtown, the old Las Vegas, the Mob Museum in there is absolutely fantastic if you're at all interested in this stuff. But we took a tour with Frank Collada, who was one of Tony Spilotro's right-hand men, and he's featured prominently in the movie Casino, his character. And, he's taking us around all Las Vegas to all the places he used to be, and he's like, yeah, I remember when I first killed that guy over there. And it was just like all matter of fact. It was kind of interesting. It was a great tour. I'd recommend that, Frank Collada's tour as well. Anyone in Vegas.
Yeah, I didn't know that was even there, but that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
It's because Vegas obviously has to have one of the most extensive histories outside of like a New York or Chicago or something like that.
Yeah. And it's like most places, a lot of that history is going away. So go see it while you can.
Yeah, exactly. So I know you mentioned like Tampa was kind of connected with some other cities. Were there like mafia family like snowbirds kind of thing where people would like come from New York and come down to Tampa to
escape the winter.
Yeah, to escape the winter.
Yeah, but that was really Miami.
Okay.
The Miami area, even the Tampa guys, so Santo Trafficante had a house in Miami. Pretty much every major mob figure from Pittsburgh to Cleveland, Boston, Buffalo, they were all down in Miami. I have a report from the mid-'80s. The FBI identified over 600 made guys in about 2,000 associates operating in Dade, Broward counties, and a lot of them were snowbirds that came down. So South Florida is considered open territory, so anyone can go down there and kind of work. So, but
that's interesting. How is it like designated like that? Like
at an early meeting of the mob, I guess they all kind of said, "Hey, it's open." Yeah, because the New York guys started going down there first, and then everyone started trickling in. And I think, like Las Vegas, they didn't have their own mafia family internally, so they kind of designated a place where they can all kind of run different scams or just go on vacation, and nobody would kind of step on each other's toes.
That's crazy. That's crazy that I guess that's the organized part of organized crime, but it is amazing that it is actually organized in that way, and that they would meet and make these rules, like they're the Little Rascals or something, like, okay, no girls allowed, nobody allowed, nobody takes over Miami kind of thing. Like,
they had some weird rules like that. So
that's amazing. That is like, I can't even fathom that. It was also amazing to me that like, I clerked for a judge while I was in law school in Philadelphia. And there were a lot of like that summer, I guess there were a couple, mafia, made men connected people who were like under indictment for whatever federal indictment, and like seeing that like there's still an active mafia community or organized crime family like in New Jersey, in Philadelphia, in that area, like amazes me that in 2018 this can still occur.
Yeah, I say that a lot in my talks. I said it's everyone says the mob's still around. I said the FBI have been after him for 30 years, and they've done a very good job in knocking them out in a lot of the U.S. I said, but here we are in 2018 and we're still talking about these. Earlier this year, I was in New York and I went to the Skinny Joey Merlino trial there. The ex-Philly boss who actually had a restaurant with his name in Boca Raton for a while. I think it just closed down last year. But so there's still a lot of that going on up there in the Northeast.
Yeah, but less of it here is what you're saying.
Yeah, not much in Tampa. And you still see it in South Florida with a lot of the snowbirds. Although it's moved out of Dade County, it's more like Palm Beach and Broward County now.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's interesting. But nothing here that you know of.
That I know of. I think it's well, I mean, some of the old time guys are still around, but it's kind of faded away.
Yeah. What is your like if you're trying to sell somebody on the mafia in Tampa, what's the number one story or like the highlight of the Tampa mafia world?
Well, I think you'd have to tie that into Cuba and say, did you know the boss of the Tampa Mafia was offered $100,000 by the CIA to kill Castro?
Really?
So, there. I think that's a pretty good elevator pitch there. Yeah. So
I did not know that.
Quite quick.
Yeah. So that to me is, if you were to differentiate it than any other family, that's a pretty good one there to throw out.
And why was that? Was it just because, the Cuban connection?
Yeah, because of the Cuban connection, because Trafficante owned a lot of property in Cuba that was seized when Castro took over. He was jailed by Castro. And the CIA was looking for any in, and knowing that organized crime had a lot of connections still on the island and, lost a lot when Castro took over, that they could leverage that to their advantage. And, I think it's pretty well known now, and certainly wasn't known back then. Late 50s, early 60s, the CIA, did a lot of under the radar stuff black ops type stuff. So,
yeah, the stuff that they make, Mission Impossible movies off of now, that kind of stuff was actually happening back then.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it was the height of the Cold War. The Russians going to be here at our back door, and obviously with the Cuban Missile Crisis and all. So.
Yeah, and I guess Florida and Tampa, part of that is like uniquely positioned, obviously, to be a key player in that.
Oh, so, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
That's amazing. So, how do you feel about the embargo being lifted in some ways?
Yeah, so I've been to Cuba. I'm going again in October. This will be my fourth time. I think it's great to try to make that rapprochement. I know there's hard feelings, and I don't want to get dragged into political quagmire. But
yeah, my family's Cuban, so my grandfather would have totally different opinions on this.
Yeah, but I've met the people there. They're very pro-U.S. The people on the street, people I've interacted with, they don't have a lot. I think, with the Castros going, and Raul's like in his 90s, so he's he can't be around much longer. I know they have a new president now. I think. irrespective of whatever might have happened with those sonic attacks last year, I think moving forward with establishing relationships. Look, here's the bottom line: we have good political relationships with Saudi Arabia, with China. I mean, countries that do far worse, and we're fine with it. But Cuba, we're all up in arms over it. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
But again, I'm coming from not a perspective of having had to live through, and I feel for people that had to live through Batista and Castro both. I mean, Batista had his certain issues, and Castro was had a ton. So I understand the feelings on both sides, but just from an outside looking in, it'd be nice if we continue this. And talking to the young people there, especially, they want that. They want to have the opportunities that we have here. Yeah. And I tell you what, it was funny. I got off the first time I went there. I packed my Cuba Vera shirt and dressed just like what I thought. I see the old time Cubans here wearing. I got off in like everyone there is dressed like a European. Like all the guys wearing the skinny jeans and the Euro shirts.
So you're just dressed like a Floridian tourist.
Exactly. I stuck out so much. I was like, oh man, look.
Because
they get all the European tourists.
But that makes sense, because if we're not trading with them, then they're getting clothes from somewhere else. Yeah.
So we're doing a mob. We did a tour in February. We're doing one in October with the Mob Museum. We're taking 10 people down, and we're doing a tour of like the Hotel Riviera, which was Lansky's place, some of Traficante's places, and looking at both the historic Cuba of Old Havana as well as the mob influence in some of the hotels.
And that was some of the stuff they had in like The Godfather also,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was funny, when I went down there, I wasn't sure how in Cuba they would view the mob's time down there, but in both the Hotel Nacional and the Sevilla Biltmore, they have photos of Traficante on the wall, and even in the Hotel Nacional, they have like the Wall of Fame, they call it, and there's one section of just some of the mobsters that had visited there. So it was kind of interesting that they're at least partially embracing that part of their history.
So you're doing tours down in Cuba with people, like exclusive tours. I have a few questions about that. Are those tours inclusive? Do you include airfare and hotel in those?
Those are inclusive, and they're run through an agency here in Tampa that is licensed by the U.S. to do tours that meets all their requirements. Yeah. And we stay in private residence, especially with the new Trump regulations. You can't stay in a lot of government-owned hotels or military-owned hotels. So this meets all the requirements for that.
That's really interesting.
What could someone expect to pay for a tour like this?
$1,500. It is for 3-day, 2-night tour, and the night before we go down to Cuba, we do the Ybor City, my Tampa Mafia tour, and then we'll talk about the ties. And then the next morning we fly down. It's a 55-minute Southwest flight down to Havana. That day. So we try to make it a seamless thing. Like the night before, you learn about the Tampa, then the Cuban connection, then next morning we're in Havana.
Is there a discount code for podcasters like us that might be interested in attending that?
If we could make a deal on some of this.
Some of this dysfunctional gray stuff. Yeah, I'm sure they would love to come too.
I need a bigger jacket so we can take that mirror.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, we could do a podcast down in Cuba. How does that sound?
That'd be great.
Yeah. Well, we're pretty much out of time, but just any final thoughts for our listeners or anything else you want to plug or just mention?
Well, my scottditchie.com, SCOTTDEITCHE.com is my website. You can find all my books on Amazon. And that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, do you want to ask me what my favorite Tampa music was?
Yeah, I wanted to. Let's talk about Tampa music. So, what's your favorite band in Tampa, or what's your favorite place to see music in Tampa? Let's start there.
Well, I'm St. Pete guy, so State Theater for sure. Although they're under renovations, I'll be curious to see when they're done. Janice Live has always been a favorite of mine. Not a big fan of a lot they've been booking lately, but and then the Ritz Theater here, I like. Yeah. I'm getting older. I'm getting more into the comfort of. Like, I'll go to the Orpheum or something if something's playing there, but I'll like the VIP section now a little bit. But,
sure.
I could tell you the worst place, although I did see Iron Maiden there and they sounded good, but Amalie Arena, the acoustics I think have gotten better there. When they started, I think they were a little too cavernous.
But arenas always kind of have that issue, you know.
Yeah. And then we're blessed with three really good kind of like theater type place, Ruth Eckerd Hall, the Performing Arts Center in Mahaffey down in St. Pete. So Those are really good places acoustic wise for seeing kind of those mid-level shows.
Yeah. So, oh man, I'm bummed now that you're a St. Pete guy. I thought,
Bummed. No, man.
I mean, I like
It's all
St.
one
Pete, but
region.
this is
Come
our,
on,
this
it's
is
all one
our,
region.
Monday
All right.
night at Ruby's Elixir, Sean Green.
True
It'll change your
that.
life.
Yeah.
No. So I'll tell you the best band ever to come out of Tampa.
What's that?
Obituary.
Oh, hell yeah. That's true. We've actually been trying to get them on the podcast for a little while.
Yeah,
So
really, they're great. I saw them quite a few. I got my nose broken at one of their shows back when the Ritz was a masquerade. This is about 1990, 91.
Yeah.
This
Did you sneeze blood on people afterwards?
No, but I like ran in and shoved toilet paper up my nose and ran back in because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss when they sang "Chopped in Half," which is my favorite song.
We need him here for Ben Falgu.
yeah, for
That's good.
when we have Goat Horror on the podcast.
I think it'd be interesting to see you and him doing taxidermy together.
That'd be fun.
That's awesome that you're a metalhead, though.
I grew up in Jersey in the 80s.
Yeah.
It's kind of like required. Sabotage was the first band when Hall and Mountain King came out, or even like right before then, that kind of got the inkling that there was bands, down south here. So when I came to Eckerd in '89, it was right when the whole scene started blowing up with the death metal, with Death Day aside, all those bands down here, and that. And we got a lot of good shows. Then, and then I got really more into alternative indie stuff. And then for a while there, it was hard to find both good local bands and like no acts came through here. You get like 1 out of 10 that would come over to Tampa. But I think in the last decade, for sure, it's gotten a lot better. Smaller bands as well as kind of like quasi, national bands that haven't quite made it real big and usually would just like hit Atlanta then go west.
Yeah.
Are now coming down here to Tampa, which is great.
It's super cool. Yeah. Part of the reason for that, honestly, is not just Tampa, but just like Florida in general has gotten the scenes around here are picking up.
Yeah.
So Orlando's got a cool scene. West Palm and Miami have a cool scene. Gainesville, Jacksonville, they have cool scenes. So like before, you'd either have you have to really commit to Florida if you're going to come here. Because it's not worth it to just hit Tampa and leave. You got to hit Tampa and Orlando and go to South Florida. And hit somewhere. Going up north on your way to wherever you're going after.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Orlando. I mean, it would take a special like band for me to go over to brave Orlando to go.
Yeah, it's funny because we talk to people all the time on this podcast who are like, "Yeah, I drove 4 hours for this show and blah blah blah." But I was like, "Man, I don't even want to drive across the bridge to St. Pete." So yeah, I know how it is.
This indie band, Bell and Sebastian. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
Yeah.
They've never played Florida, and I liked them since the mid '90s. And they finally played, and they played in Orlando. But I went to see them because I'm like,
it's close.
They're never going to come. Again, New Pornographers. Nico Case played in Orlando. We drove out there, but it's few and far between. Now, if there's anything even. I'm like, I like 50% of songs now. I'll pass.
So when is the Cigar City death metal book coming out?
Yeah,
that's what I want to read.
That'd be a
now.
really good book. Yeah, that would be a good one.
Because there's a lot of like, that was kind of the haven for death metal for a while. It was
and Morrisound Studios up in Temple Terrace
Yeah.
was the place they recorded a lot of that. And that scene, the bands are still there. I know Obituary still tours quite a bit. I think they were on the part of Slayer's last tour. This past tour they did, which is Slayer's final tour.
Yeah.
They were on a number of their shows.
I went to Slayer's final. Like that was one of the shows where I drove. Me and my buddy drove to Orlando to see that. Because it was like Slayer's final tour.
Yeah, I've seen
they
them a
weren't
few
coming
times,
to Tampa.
so I was like,
yeah,
but
I saw them on the only other time I'd seen them was when they did. It was like the 20th anniversary or 25th anniversary of Rain and Blood or whatever, and they were performing the album from beginning to end.
Nice.
And I remember being stoked about that fact. I was like, that's really awesome. They're doing beginning to end. And then when they played it, I realized I was like, that's like a 20-minute album.
Yeah.
Like it's really not that.
It's a very, very quick album.
So fast, some bands have one song that's longer than that whole album, so but it was still awesome. And, their final tour was really cool. And, at the Orlando Amphitheater, which I didn't know was a place.
I didn't know that was a place.
Yeah, it's they got to get some things worked out there, but it was an interesting spot.
Well, you bring one other quick thing about that too is the other thing that I don't like are the great shows that I want to see that are in the middle of the summer outside. Like Janelle Monáe played Janice Live, and I'm like, that'd be such a great show to see. I'm not going to Janice Live in the middle of July.
Well, you missed out because that show was brought to you by our sponsors. No Clubs and State Media.
Visit noclubs.com.
Tell them to put big air conditionings out.
Yeah. Let's get big
but it sold out anyway. So I actually, and then Metallica played the Citrus Bowl last summer.
Yeah.
I don't know. No. Although I will say I'd much rather go to an outside show in Tampa than an outside show in Orlando, because at least we get the breeze and a little bit. It gets hot there.
Yeah,
but
they need to build more. Like I was thinking about that when my New Jersey friends were in town and we went to like the Ben T. Davis area, over there. And I was like, man, they should put a cool venue like right here on the water.
That'd be a great idea. But if they had something like right overlooking the water, that'd be really neat.
Yeah, like just move out Hogan's Beach and all that and just put in a kick-ass venue.
Well, they used to have shows up there at Clearwater over there. I remember going to a few of those. I mean, it wasn't anything super big. And there for a while, they had shows on Clearwater Beach back in the mid-'90s, but they stopped doing that. First of all, Clearwater Beach, getting to it, it was a little bit of a nightmare. But so.
All right, I guess just last question, just as a Tampa guy, as somebody who, is into history and everything around here, how do you feel about the Rays potentially moving to Ybor? Do you think it's going to happen? Do you think it's a good idea?
As a St. Pete resident, I hope it happens because a couple of reasons. We gave it a shot. It didn't work. Let it go.
Yes. That's a good point. Yeah.
St. Pete is booming right now. That land is extremely valuable and would be a huge boon to have a city on the upswing like St. Pete to suddenly have that much land available for development. I think would be good for a variety of purposes, whether it be mixed use or an expansion of USS St. Pete, or there are a number of proposals for that. I think if you're going to make it work in Tampa, that somewhere out here in the Ybor to maybe a little bit further east area would probably be your best bet. The problem, though, is going to be, you know how it is. Even on a good day, traffic is bad. That's going to be the challenge. I think. Well, the funding is always the challenge, but I think the challenge is going to deal with the traffic off of I-4.
Traffic off of I-4, that malfunction junction, and parking on a good day in Ybor.
Yeah, that was going to be the parking will be a nightmare.
Yeah, it'll be a boon for the business here, but unless you can figure out a way to address that. That's going to be the big challenge. I think it can work. Look at the Lightning, and part of it too is the product. Tropicana Field's I'm not a huge baseball fan, but even Tropicana Field doesn't make you want to be a huge baseball fan.
Yeah.
But you go to see a Lightning game, even if you're not a hockey fan, you leave with a really good fan experience. So I think if they can do that here in Ybor, that might work. But, and the other thing is, it was funny because I was just reading something the other day about the median age of, baseball fans is like creeping up.
Yeah.
It's like 58 or 59. Damn. Whereas NBA is like 26 or 27.
Sure. Yeah. Like, I don't know anybody, like, I shouldn't say that. I don't know that many people that are into baseball.
Yeah, so
I am.
And I spend that kind of.
But I'm into it because my dad got me into it, and that's like how it works.
I'm just thinking that solely from a financial perspective, if the city would want to do it. But from a St. Pete resident, I think it's a good thing if they leave.
No, I think I agree with you. I think most people think that. Yeah.
If I didn't know what you were talking about, and you had said that.
Go. But
it's true.
And I don't know if you guys remember, but back the Lightning played in St. Pete originally.
Yeah, the Thunderdome.
Yeah, the Thunder. I used to think probably would have been good if we kept hockey, and because a lot of Canadians on the beaches and stuff, we probably could have done very well with hockey, and then baseball would have started off in Tampa, might have had a more stable fan base, and I think the big thing too is the corporate support.
Yeah.
You'll probably get a lot more corporations, especially from downtown Tampa, supporting them if they were in Ybor. So, long story short, if you guys can pay for it, I think it might work. So, good deal.
No, I'm not paying for it. That's that's what everybody says. Like, I'm not paying for it. Oh yeah, we're gonna pay for it somewhere or another, whether through increased tolls or something.